Hello. Welcome along to episode 198 of Adventures in Pop. My name is Simon Jacobs. You're looking festive, I've got to say, very festive indeed, and just don't overdo it. Pace yourself, we've got a long way to go still, as we reach the end of year, kind of silly season, and a good time for rounding things up. In this video today, I am tackling part two of the artists that influenced me the most in the whole world ever. So, part one, I took in very strict alphabetical order a look at the 10 artists that have influenced me the most. We went through 5 of them. So, in part one, we talked about Anita Baker, we talked about Elton John, Frank Ocean, George Michael, and Kate Bush. So, as we get into the second 5 and we're further down the alphabet, I need to make a little confession. This is so silly. I woke up in the night in pretty much a cold sweat, realising that I had missed off at least one, actually two, of my all-time favourite artists off my top 10 list. And so what was I going to do? It was already too late to change part one because I'd already published it. It was already out there. And yet the two artists that I wanted to include that I'd completely forgotten about should have been in part one. So part two, the remaining 5, has suddenly turned into a rather odd remaining 7, because my top 10 has turned into a top 12. Because the other thing, as I was tossing and turning in bed thinking, how could I have done that, was that I refused actually to take any out. I looked at the list and I thought, no, I can't. Particularly as, they'll know that they're in my list. So we have a top 12. So I'm going to run through now the 7 remaining artists that I didn't mention the other day in part one, and I'm just embarrassed really that I forgot about 2 of them, and we'll come to them at the end. Okay, so I'm going to carry on as if nothing was wrong, and then we'll just get to 2 rather spurious ones that obviously should have been much earlier. So this part 2 is going to start with Leonard Cohen. L for Leonard. I think I probably need to start at the beginning with Leonard Cohen. I went on holiday when I was 18. I think I'd just finished my A-levels. I went on holiday with 3 other guys that I knew. And we went to the south of France. And for about 3 weeks, we stayed in a kind of caravan in a caravan park near Saint-Raphael in the south of France. And we sunbathed and, hung out and stuff, and we were away for quite a long time. The reason I'm telling you this was that somebody amongst us, it wasn't me, I think it might have been my friend Graham, brought with him a cassette of Leonard Cohen's greatest hits. I'm sure it's a very well-known greatest hits album, and basically at the age of 18, 4 of us, these 4 teenage boys with probably, hormones running all over the place, we wanted every night to go to bed with the sound of Leonard Cohen in our ears. And that Leonard Cohen had this reputation, I should say, for being, a miserable old sod and, funereal music to, slit your wrists to and all that kind of stuff, which was always a very mean and unnecessary kind of nickname for him, because actually I just found him poetic, beautiful. I thought the words were ridiculously sort of, beautiful and visual and profound and deep, and I didn't understand most of it, but it just sounded great. I loved the deep gravelly voice. I loved the girl singers who would enhance bits, in the chorus and do like little ba 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 in the background in so many of his songs, and it was just magical. And so from that moment on, I mean, my love affair with Leonard Cohen just remained from every night with Leonard Cohen's greatest hits. And so if I hear any of the tracks from Leonard Cohen's greatest hits, I'm immediately back in a caravan in the south of France, being 18 and just finishing my A-levels. But, I mean, every single home should have a Leonard Cohen greatest hits album. And there were several albums way beyond the greatest hits that were really good. I'm Your Man was really good. I think I bought an album called 10 Songs. Really, really lovely. I really, really enjoyed it. And as his life, went on, his voice just went lower and lower and lower until it became a voice that frankly only dogs and cats could hear. So what he was doing at the end of his life was recording music with a lot of other singers kind of shadowing his voice. Otherwise, his voice dropped so low that it was, it was inaudible to the human ear. It was remarkable. Anyway, Leonard Cohen, uh, one of the great songwriting influences, and particularly with those fantastic lyrics and his just kind of very. He didn't care whether the song was slow and long, and he just would deliver it. And this was in the days before I knew anything about, say, Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen, which I always found a quite an irritating song. But forget about that. Go and get his greatest hits. Go and get I'm Your Man. Fantastic albums. Great. Okay, moving on from Leonard Cohen, we're going to go to M. M for Marvin Gaye. I can't get through this without Marvin Gaye. I've got a picture of Marvin Gaye on my wall in my living room. I look at it every day and think, blimey, he was good, wasn't he? Marvin Gaye, probably the best voice I've ever heard, I think, singing any song ever. And obviously, one is drawn particularly to his early 70s output with, What's Going On, Let's Get It On, I Want You. Three fantastic albums with three, amazing tracks on. And particularly, obviously, the much lauded What's Going On, will last forever. It's a great album. It's one of those rare albums you can put it on the beginning, play it right through to the end, and it's, the standard never really drops. Fantastic album. He obviously, big Motown star, made it big in the 60s, then became rather like Stevie Wonder, kind of, conscious of politics and race and Vietnam War and all those things that then imbued his music. And he had quite a serious addiction to drugs. I think it made life difficult for him. He spent a long time living in Belgium and made his comeback in the early 80s when he eventually, released Sexual Healing, and then was murdered by his father in, I think, 83, 84 maybe. Anyway, tragic and tragic. Well, it's easy to say tragic, but just an incredible loss to the whole world. And as I say, I would, if you don't know much about Marvin Gaye, you want to catch up on Marvin. What's Going On, Let's Get It On, I Want You. Even if you just go and get a greatest hits that's got all three of those tracks on, you're doing well. Marvin Gaye. Moving on to P. P for the Pet Shop Boys. The Pet Shop Boys, I think, are they now the most successful duo in pop music ever? They just basically, they had their first hit, in 1986, 85, 86, and they just kept going, basically. Still never smiling on any of their publicity photos. I mean, there's something really good about the fact that they just know what they're doing, they know who they are, they know what they do, and they do it really well, and they've just carried on doing it. Now, of course, there was their kind of purple period. They were, their period when they were in their pomp and they were having number one hits and every album was huge, and that drifted away. And I guess my interest in them also drifted away a little bit. I mean, I was really, taken aback by the fantastic songwriting, really, at the beginning. Great words. The albums were coming out each year and they were always essential. And at some point in the 90s, I think that did sort of, go into kind of permanent decline. But okay, so they don't get the audiences they used to get, but they have worked in so many different kind of genres now. They've done kind of classical pieces. They've performed their songs in so many different ways in different theatrical settings, and they're still out there kind of innovating in a way, even though maybe they don't have the audience they used to. I think they're still right there, at the cutting edge and hanging out with people like Lady Gaga and stuff like that. So Pet Shop Boys, love them to bits. I've seen them a few times in concert, but actually, what I want to tell you about is a very odd occasion when I was walking down the Charing Cross Road in London, and I was wearing at the time my Pet Shop Boys sweatshirt. I think I had, very rarely did I ever have, an item of merchandise from any artist, but I did have a Pet Shop Boys sweatshirt. I'm walking down Charing Cross Road with my Pet Shop Boys sweatshirt on, and who would I bump into walking in the other direction right past me? Yeah, the Pet Shop Boys, both of them. Neil and Chris walking up the Charing Cross Road. I think they sort of glanced and thought, "Oh, that's one of our sweatshirts," and there might have been like a millisecond of eye contact, but we were all too cool to really say anything about it. So on we went with our day. If you want to check out Pet Shop Boys, at their very best, I'd say, go to the first 3, 4 albums. I think Behaviour is brilliant, Introspective is brilliant, and yeah, they're probably my favourites. And the first two, Please and Actually, I think it was. Okay, let's move on. R for Rufus Wainwright. So here is the other kind of 21st century artist on my list, along with Frank Ocean, somebody who really did emerge in the 21st century, at the beginning of the 21st century, to be fair. And okay, my history with Rufus Wainwright is I saw him in concert in, I don't know, 2005, 2006 at Hammersmith, and then saw him again and again and again with a bunch of friends who we were all really quite, into him. And his shows were really good. His rapport with the audience was always really good. And his albums were really good. And I loved particularly Want One and Want Two, right near the beginning of his career. I think it's his second and third albums, particularly Want One. I thought it was an astonishing, precocious album of incredibly varied music, very complex arrangements. He wasn't afraid of just going all over the place. So sometimes it sounded sort of bombastic and ridiculous, but still good. And sometimes it was, it was tender and introspective and thoughtful and beautiful. But not everybody is a Rufus Wainwright fan because of his voice and the way he sings. I think for some that you reach the edge of your tolerance fairly quickly. I haven't got a problem with his singing, and I've listened to him live lots of times and always really enjoyed him. I got a little bit bored of his complete sort of adoration for Judy Garland. I could, whatever, but Rufus Wainwright. I kind of think it's funny that over the years, I think he's tried so hard to be kind of a successful pop star. He's worked with a lot of big producers and always trying to find the kind of the pop song that's going to really do it for him. And I think that has always eluded him. Basically, I think his albums are often really good, but it's not commercial in that kind of way. His songs are just a little bit too weird. And he has, as you possibly know, he's branched out into writing, opera and classical pieces, and he's a multi-talented, multi-instrument kind of guy, and he's Canadian, and he's lovely, and I'm thrilled that he's on my list of influences. And I think it is those first, album 2 and 3, Want One and Want Two, Release the Stars that came after that. These are fantastic albums. And rather like the Pet Shop Boys, I haven't quite stayed with him for the whole journey. So things have waned a little bit since then, but still, I'd say a huge talent and a big impact on me. Which takes us to the 10th, which would have been the end, and that is S for Simon and Garfunkel, or even S for Paul Simon, because I think I have to lump Simon and Garfunkel, Paul Simon, and his solo career is slightly different from the Simon and Garfunkel songs, but oh my goodness. Okay, I used to hear on the radio Bridge Over Troubled Water when I was really young, 9, 10 years old, and just think, what an astonishing song. What is this? I mean, who wrote this? And I think with Bridge Over Troubled Water and also with Mrs. Robinson, they were so perfect that I did think that it would be impossible for anyone to ever write anything better than those songs. Um, I was drawn to the kind of simplicity of some of the arrangements, although Bridge Over Troubled Waters is not simple. Um, and Art Garfunkel's amazing voice, the two of them singing in harmony was always fantastic, and real good harmonies. And sometimes really complicated chord structures. Go and listen to right at the end of, yes, after they split up. Actually, they did work together and record In My Little Town. That's a really complicated song, and I absolutely adore it. So Simon and Garfunkel, huge impact when I was really young, and then Paul Simon as a solo artist. I remember at university buying One Trick Pony, which is not one of his best albums, but I still love, at least half the tracks on that album. I think are really good. I absolutely adore American Tune, which is from what much earlier album. Here Comes Rhymin' Simon. American Tune, check that one out. That's on his collections. And then of course when Graceland came out mid-80s, blimey, really something special. I did see the Paul Simon Graceland concerts in the slightly later 80s at the Royal Albert Hall, and sensational it was too, with all the African musicians from Graceland joining him on stage. So look, here we are at I've done 10 out of my 10 artists who influenced me, but as I said at the beginning, I missed out two, and there's no way of pretending that I didn't. And the two I missed out are two that I absolutely adore and cherish. And it's almost like I've taken them for granted. They're so in front of my nose that I didn't see them. David Bowie is the first. Sorry, David, I'm awfully sorry. Rather like Bridge Over Troubled Water or Mrs. Robinson, when I heard Life on Mars, I thought, well, that's it then, really. The game's up. There's no point. There's no point in me trying to write anything. It's all been done. Life on Mars absolutely blew me away. And I probably, for most of the 1970s, I would, if pushed, that would have been the song that I would say was, my favourite song ever recorded. So it made a big impact on me, and it took me a long time to work out, what the chords of that were, because that's a strange song with Rick Wakeman, as I'm sure you know, playing the piano. But basically, until Let's Dance in the early 80s, that whole sequence of 70s albums from David Bowie, I think will remain forever, amongst the greatest sort of set of albums, one after another, that any artist has ever produced. You go from, Hunky Dory right through Ziggy and Aladdin Sane, Station to Station, and Young Americans, and the Berlin period, Scary Monsters, up to Let's Dance. Those are all astonishing albums. And actually, that brings me neatly to the very last on my list, which is E for Elvis Costello. And rather like David Bowie, Elvis Costello just hit a fantastic groove at the beginning of his career, from My Aim Is True through to, I don't know, probably about 5 or 6, 7 albums in, certainly Punch the Clock, which was 1984. So from the beginning of his career in 77 with My Aim Is True through, a whole bunch of albums like Get Happy and Imperial Bedroom in particular, Armed Forces as well. These were just fantastic albums, and I reckon he did produce 6 amazing albums in a row. What I loved about him was that these were, little short, sharp tunes with that kind of slight punk sensibility to begin with, that new wave sensibility. But my goodness, it did blossom and broaden. But also his words. He was the master of the clever and sometimes really spiteful words, and I loved it. And I certainly wanted to be able to write words as well as Elvis. So Elvis Costello would be my 12th out of 10. So running through all of them, we're talking Anita Baker, Elton John, Frank Ocean, George Michael, Kate Bush, Leonard Cohen, Marvin Gaye, Pet Shop Boys, Rufus Wainwright, Simon and Garfunkel, David Bowie, and Elvis Costello. Thank you all if you're listening. Some of them obviously probably won't be. And thank you as well. We're getting nearer and nearer to Christmas. There is music coming out straight after Christmas, but I'll be back with more nonsense and probably another list very shortly. You take care. Thank you for listening. Bye bye.